Welcome everybody to my new chess lecture about most important endgames. In this video we're gonna talk about the most important thing to understand endgames, and this is the opposition. What is the opposition? The opposition is when both kings are facing each other, when it is one square between them. I think this is a very easy example to explain you that. So the question is, who's better? White, for example, is better when black is leaving the opposition. So if it is black's move now, white is gonna win. And if it is white who has to leave the opposition now, black can draw. And at first I will show you what will happen when black leave the opposition and how you can win with white. Black has to leave the opposition. For example, king goes here, and you remember if your opponent leaves the opposition, you can go this diagonal step with the king. And for example, he goes here, you get another opposition. King goes on the other side, and then you go another diagonal step. And for example, your opponent tries this move to defend. You just play a waiting move with the pawn. King goes here, and then you push the pawn again. And what should black do? For example, he goes into the 8th rank, but then you get another opposition and he has to move. You go to the 7th rank and you're promoting the pawn to a queen. There's one mistake which many players does do, and here you can play a big mistake, and this is pushing the pawn, but then black is getting the opposition, and this is a forced draw. So for example, he gives a check. King goes in the 8th rank behind the pawn, and then wherever the white king moves, this is a draw. He cannot go outside of the pawn because black can take the pawn. He cannot go here. This is immediately draw. So this is the worst move you can play in this position. Important is, whenever you can, keep the opposition by yourself and play this move, because black has to move here, and then you can go the last diagonal step onto the 7th rank, and then there's nothing who can stop the pawn which can promote to queen. Now I will show you how you can manage a draw if black has the opposition. Okay, white has to move and has to leave the opposition. For example here. And then very important, follow the white king, keep the opposition by yourself. Okay, pawn has to move and not going back now. If you go back, white can follow the king and keep the opposition by himself. So you have to go to the middle behind the pawn. This is very important. So now white has no move who gains the opposition for himself. Okay, pawn has to move, and now same story again, not play king on the 7th rank, because if you push the king, he has the opposition. So retreat the king. And then if king comes, you go for opposition, check, behind the pawn. It's the same story. And for example, he plays this move. This is also drawn because king can come back to the 8th rank, and after king on the 6th rank, you go opposition, check, king is on the 8th rank behind the pawn, and this is completely drawn. So you can manage this, you can see how or why this is a forced draw. Another very important position to know is this one, because if you reach this position with 2 kings and 1 pawn between the kings, this is always a draw. No matter who has the opposition or is to move, it's always a draw. If you don't believe me at first, I will show you what will happen when white has the opposition and black has to move. So for example, black moves here, king comes, and you can see it, black is gaining the opposition. So this is a forced draw now. I play just a few moves, check, he goes back, king goes here, and then the star move, you know from the example before, king to e8, and after this one, black goes to opposition again, check, and the king is behind the pawn, and this is a forced draw. When white is to move, you can also not win this game. For example, king here, And if you're black, you always have to remember the same things. Don't play king here, because if you play the king here, white gets the opposition. But if you know the stuff, you stay in the middle behind the pawn, and if king comes, black is getting the opposition. So this is also draw position. At the next step, I will show you how you can manage to promote this pawn into a queen, and how you can keep the things easy here. The plan is to play the king here, here, and here. So the king has to go in front of the pawn, then you can keep opposition by yourself. Okay, you can see this. King has to move here. Just play a few moves. King here, and opposition. You have the opposition. Black is to move, and then you go this. If black goes out of opposition, he leaves the opposition, then you go this diagonal step with the king. And if he tries to keep the opposition by himself, you give this check, and then he has to move. Then you go opposition, then he has to move. And now the king is on the 6th rank, so you can move the pawn. And for example, if you play this move, you have already opposition. Black has to move king on the 7th rank, and this pawn is gonna promote to queen. In the next level, we're looking for the distant opposition, which is really hard to calculate if you don't know how you can do this easily. The best way to calculate the distant opposition is if you look for the perfect square. When you can move there, you have the opposition, and this is here a6. Then you can count 2 squares, 1, 2, 1, 2, only in 2 steps. And if you reached one of the squares, for example king to a2, you can keep the opposition by yourself. Then black is to move here, then you search the perfect square, 1, 2, and you go for this. And then king here and king here. And now white has the opposition. And this is the most important thing, how to calculate very easily in the distant opposition. Let's have a look for a practical game, how you can use the calculation I showed you before of the distant opposition. In this game we are white. White is to move and can force the draw. But how can we calculate this easily? At first, we search the opposition square where we want to go for and have to draw. So this is the perfect square we want to go. And then we go 2 steps, 1, 2. And if you mark these 2 steps, remember you have to stay on the same file like the king of your opponent. Okay, so you want to reach this square. And how you can reach this square? With king to d2 and with king to d1. Okay, now we have to think only about these 2 steps. And for example, king to d1. Now we have to calculate what are the opposition squares of your opponent. Black wants to come into d3 and 2 steps, 1, 2, or d5. Now, if black can reach now one of these 2 squares, he can win the opposition and the game. For example, king d5, king d2, king d4, and black has opposition. This is losing for white. So we can say that if king to d1, your opponent can reach one of these opposition squares. Okay? Let's look for the other move, king to d2. Now, the opposition squares black wants to move on are d4 and d6. And now the question again, can black reach one of these opposition squares? The answer is no. He's blockaded by his own pawn, and the d4 square is too far away. So this is a forced draw. This is the easy answer by calculating this distant opposition. For example, he cannot reach one of them here, and then king to d3 draws the game. That's how to calculate such types of position in the distant opposition. Okay, now let's have a look for another example in a realistic game. if I look at this, if it is black to move, it will be an easy win, that's clear. But if it is white to move, white can forcefully go for a draw in this position. And the move is pawn to e5, and black has to forcefully capture the pawn. And then if you look at this, you have to use the trick I showed you before, and you can see that here are some opposition squares left for white, and white is going for the opposition and can go for the forced draw. Okay, we start using the trick. At first, we look at the square we want to go for. So, but we can't reach this by one step. So then we count on 2. 1, 2. So that are the 2 squares we want to go by the next move. And yes, we reach the square, and so we can gain opposition. So king c1 is the forced draw. For example, I show you a few moves. King here, king d2 opposition, king here, king e2 opposition, and that's the forced draw. At least I will show you a very important position to know. And this is when 2 pawns are on the middle and are blocked by themselves, and the kings are on the side. And here I have to tell you the ideas, what is important, how you can manage a draw if you have to move now here, because this is quite difficult. And the most important thing to know here is don't go into the pawns immediately, because this is quite losing. Black has the chance to go to the pawns too, and now white has to leave his own pawn. Only these squares are the possibilities from white. For example, he goes here, black can take and can manage this to an easy win. So it is not possible to come into the pawns at first. This is a big mistake from both sides. So what else can white try? Perhaps he can try this one. But then black can play a waiting move like this. And now if white plays this one and close up to the pawns, black can do the same thing, and white has the same problem than before. He cannot protect his own pawn and has to go out. Black can take and is winning. So, okay, white is forced to go here, but then black can simply capture the pawn. Okay, so this is losing and this is losing immediately. That we saw. What else is with this move? For example, king goes here, but this is also losing because of opposition. Black king can go to e3 and force white king to go out from the pawn, and black is winning the pawn and the game. So what is the correctly move? Okay, there is only one move left, I know. The correct move is definitely king to b3 here. And this is the only move which keeps the opposition to white and forces a draw. For example, black plays a move like this one, then you play this and to keep the opposition. And if black played a tricky move here, you only have to look for the opposition. Don't worry about the pawn. White goes out with c2. And then king captures and king to d2, and we have the forced draw. That's how you should manage such positions. I think it is really important to know this, because this position is really realistic here. This was it with my first video about opposition. I think you learned a lot of them. If you have some questions, you can ask in the comment. And I hope you like this video, and see you. Bye bye.